She fled her toxic marriage in the dead of night and boarded a plane, never knowing the man beside her was one of Milan's most dangerous mafia bosses. When turbulence shook the cabin, his hand closed over hers, his voice a low command. "Pretend you're with me." She thought it was kindness. She didn't know it was the beginning of a choice between freedom and a gilded chinch. The rain hammered Boston's narrow streets as Amelia Taylor ran barefoot into the night, clutching a stolen passport and a wad of hidden cash, her only lifeline. Thunder cracked above the brownstone roofs, but it was Richard's voice that echoed louder in her head. "You're nothing without me, Amelia. Nothing." Her lungs burned. The wet pavement sliced at her heels, each step a jolt of pain. She welcomed more than the suffocating silence of his control. She had planned this escape for Mahu months. $300 folded tight in a plastic bag beneath the kitchen drawer liner. A passport she'd hidden behind tax documents Richard never touched. For weeks, she told herself she'd never have the courage to use them until tonight. The house lights had glared like interrogation lamps as his hand struck her cheek. The sting sharpened the whiskey on his breath, burning her nostrils, his words low and venomous. "Talk back to me again, and I'll show you who you belong to." But she hadn't answered. The storm outside had done it for her. She'd ripped herself free, bolted into the rain, and hadn't looked back. A pair of headlights cut through the downpour. Amelia stumbled into the street, waving desperately. The taxi skidded to a stop, tires hissing. Logan. She gasped, collapsing into the back seat, water dripping onto cracked vinyl. "International. Please hurry." The driver, an older man with silver hair, glanced at her through the mirror. His voice was gentle, weary, like someone who had seen daughters cry in the back seat. "Rough night, miss." Amelia pressed the damn passport against her chest, as if it could shield her. "The worst, but not my last." The cab smelled faintly of pine air freshener and old cigarettes. Outside, Boston blurred brick facade slick with rain, neon signs glowing like bleeding colors. Her pulse hammered, half expecting Richard's headlights to appear behind them, slicing through the storm. By the time the taxi pulled under Logan International's glowing awning, Amelia's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her purse. She shoved crumpled bills at the driver and didn't wait for change. Inside the terminal buzzed with late-night urgency. Rolling suitcases clattered across tile. Announcements echoed overhead. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. Travelers rushed with purpose. Amelia drifted like a ghost. Wet hair plastered to her cheeks, shoes squatching with every step. At the departure board, her eyes darted through the blur of destinations. London, Paris, Toronto. None felt far enough. Then she saw it. Milan. Boarding in 40 minutes. Milan. She remembered the college textbooks Richard had mocked, her whispered dream of seeing the Brera Art Gallery one day. He had laughed, called it childish. Tonight, it felt like salvation. "One way to Milan," she whispered at the counter, sliding her soaked passport and trembling credit card across. The clerk blinked at her disheveled state, but typed without question. "No luggage." Amelia looked at herself. Wet jeans, thin jacket purse clutched like a life preserver. Just carry-on boarding pass in hand. She sank into a plastic seat near gate 22. Announcements cracked overhead in a dozen languages. She hugged her knees, scanning every passing face, convinced Richard's men lurked in the crowd. Out on the runway, a jetliner crouched like a waiting beast, lights cutting through the storm. Her escape, her gamble. When the call for boarding came, Amelia's legs nearly buckled. She forced herself up, every step heavy but fueled by raw will. "Seat 12B," the attendant said, smiling as she scanned the pass. The word "enjoy" sounded foreign as Amelia clutched the stub. The jet bridge smelled of rain and jet fuel, each step carrying her farther from Boston, closer to the unknown. Inside the cabin hummed with low conversation recycled air and the faint tang of metal. Amelia slid into row 12. She exhaled a shaky release she hadn't allowed in years. For the first time, Richard wasn't in control. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "You made it. You're free." But she didn't notice the shadow that paused in the aisle. A man in a tailored suit, shoulders broad, presence sharp as a blade. He slid into seat 12A without a word. His watch gleamed under the cabin light, his dark eyes scanning the rows before landing briefly on her. Amelia's breath hitched. She didn't know it yet, but Franco de Meaux, the man beside her, was about to rewrite what freedom would cost. 2 years earlier, Amelia Taylor had stood beneath a string of white lights, smiling for photographs beside Richard Taylor. In every picture, his hand rested possessively at her waist, his smile charming enough to convince the world he was a devoted husband. What no one saw was how tightly his fingers pressed, how she flinched when the flash faded. At first, Richard had been magnetic. Polished shoes, perfect suits, a laugh that could light up a dinner party. He had swept Amelia off her feet during her final year of college, telling her she was too good for cheap apartments and part-time jobs, that he would give her a life of security. She believed him. Who wouldn't? He opened doors, sent flowers, told her she was brilliant. He hung her sketches on the wall of his office, bragging that his wife was an artist. She thought she had found a partner, but the compliments carried hooks. "You're so talented," he'd say, "though art won't pay the bills." "You're beautiful, Amelia. Don't let those friends of yours make you forget who you belong to." At first, she brushed it aside. He was protective, not possessive. That's what she told herself. But slowly, the walls began to close in. Richard's charm withered once the vows were spoken. He complained when she visited her sister, accused her friends of being a bad influence, demanded she quit the art classes she loved. "You don't need them," he said. "You have me." When she resisted, his voice hardened. A slam door, a broken glass, a grip around her wrist too tight to be affectionate. The first slap came 6 months into their marriage. She remembered the taste of iron in her mouth, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. He apologized the next morning, pressed roses into her hand. "I lost control," he whispered. "It won't happen again." It did. Control became his daily language. He monitored her phone, checked her credit card statements, memorized her work schedule. He timed her trips to the grocery store, accused her of lying if she was late. He bought her clothes, but told her what to wear. And the art, the one thing that had once made her feel alive, he stripped away piece by piece. "Painting is childish," Richard sneered one night, tossing her sketchbook into the trash. "Be a wife. Grow up." Every time he spoke, it was as if he was chiseling away at who she was leaving only a hollow outline. For a while, Amelia tried to comply. She cooked the meals, smelled at the parties, wore the dresses he chose. She told herself if she just did everything right, maybe he would soften again. But abusers don't soften. They escalate. Richard became an expert at making her doubt herself. If she cried, he called her hysterical. If she argued, he said she was ungrateful. If she tried to leave the house without telling him, he called it betrayal. His words dug deeper than his fists. "You're nothing without me, Amelia. Nothing." The cruelest part was how she began to believe him. There were nights she sat awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she truly was worthless, if maybe she had invited this. If perhaps freedom was a fantasy meant for other people. The Amelia who once dreamed of traveling, of painting, in foreign streets, of standing beneath masterpieces, she was gone until one night, bruises blooming purple along her arm. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair hung limp, her eyes dull, her spirit fractured. That was when she made a quiet, desperate vow. She began to plan. It started small, slipping 20s from his wallet when he was drunk tucking them into a hollowed-out book spine, researching passports late at night when he snored beside her memorizing flight schedules in secret. She wasn't ready then, but she needed to believe she could be. And when Richard struck her across the face at dinner in front of his colleagues, when the wine glass shattered against the wall, red streaking like blood down the wallpaper, something inside her snapped. She didn't cry. Not this time. She looked at him with a steadiness that surprised even herself, and in that moment, she knew the next chance she had, she would run. For months, she waited the cash hidden beneath the kitchen drawer liner, the passport tucked behind tax forms. She rehearsed the steps in her head, unlock the drawer, grab the bag, slip into the rain. And on that storm-soaked night in Boston, when Richard's rage boiled over into promises of more violence, Amelia finally chose herself. She chose the door. She chose the storm. She chose freedom, even if it killed her. The jet engines roared as the aircraft tore itself from Boston's stormy sky. Rain stray across the oval window beside Amelia, each drop a silver thread vanishing into the dark. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, whispering to herself, "You're free. You're free." But her chest still felt caged. The cabin lights dimmed, settling passengers into a false sense of calm. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisle, offering drinks, collecting orders. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Amelia folded her hands in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Then the turbulence hit. The plane jolted, dropping violently as if the earth had yanked it back. Luggage bins rattled. A child cried out 2 rows behind her. Amelia's knuckles turned white against the armrests. Her body remembered before her mind did, the sound of glass shattering, Richard's voice cutting through her, the sharp sting across her cheek, her pulse skyrocketed, breath turning shallow and fast. She couldn't move, couldn't think. She was back in that kitchen, cornered, small, powerless. Then his voice, "Breathe." Amelia turned startled. The man in 12A had been silent since takeoff. Now his dark eyes were on her, steady, unreadable. His hand reached across the armrest covering hers with surprising gentleness. His touch was warm, grounding, nothing like Richard's brutal grip. "Look at me," he said low, accented his voice calm against the chaos. Her gaze locked on his. For a moment, the cabin noise fell away, the rattling, the frightened voices, the metallic groan of the plane cutting through the clouds. All she saw were his eyes, deep, intent, unwavering. "Breathe with me." He inhaled slowly, deliberately, then exhaled. She tried to follow. At first her lungs caught her throat tightening, but his hands stayed firm over hers, and something about his control, the way nothing in him wavered, even as the plane lurched again, anchored her. Inhale, exhale, bit by bit, her panic loosened its grip. Her heart slowed. The cabin leveled out, turbulence easing to a low rumble. "Better?" he asked. Amelia nodded, realizing with a flush of embarrassment that her hand was still beneath his. She started to pull back, but his gaze flicked downward, stopping her. Her sleeve had slipped up during the chaos, exposing the dark bruises encircling her wrist. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. Just released her hand slowly, as if giving her a choice. She tugged her sleeve down, heat rising in her cheeks. He didn't press, didn't ask. That somehow felt even more disarming. The flight attendants resumed service as if nothing had happened. The cabin filled with the faint clink of glassware, the scent of reheated meals. Passengers adjusted headphones, reopened books. Normal life resumed, but Amelia's pulse hadn't settled. Not because of the turbulence, because of him. Who was this man? His suit was too sharp for a red-eye flight. His cufflinks gleamed even in the dim light. His profile looked carved from marble, yet his presence carried something far heavier than beauty, authority, danger, even. She forced herself to face the window again, but the question noted at her. Why did his voice calm her when nothing else could? Hours passed in a blur of engine hum and shifting shadows. Amelia drifted in and out of restless half-sleep, always aware of him beside her. His silence wasn't indifferent, it was deliberate. A man comfortable in control. When the captain's voice crackled overhead announcing their approach into Munich for a layover, Amelia stretched her body stiff. She reached for her purse, but before she could rise, his voice came again, lower this time, almost a whisper. "Pretend you're with me." She froze, turning slowly to him. "What?" His gaze didn't waver. "When we land, stay close. Don't ask questions." Something in his tone, quiet, commanding, absolute, sent a shiver through her. Not fear, not exactly something sharper, a warning disguised as protection. Before she could respond, the plane dipped into its descent, cabin lights flickering back on. Passengers stirred, fastening belts, gathering bags. Amelia looked down at her lap, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. Why would she need to pretend? What could possibly be waiting in Munich? She didn't know. But when the man beside her finally extended his arm to guide her into the aisle, Amelia didn't resist. The cabin doors hissed open, releasing passengers into the sterile brightness of Munich International. Fluorescent lights glared off polished tile, reflecting the endless lines of duty-free shops and security checkpoints. German announcements echoed overhead, clipped and precise, bouncing against the glass walls. Amelia stepped into the jet bridge, her knees still shaky from the flight. The recycled air smelled faintly of jet fuel and roasted coffee drifting from the terminal cafes. She tightened her grip on her purse. "Stay with me," Franco murmured beside her. His hand touched the small of her back, light, guiding yet deliberate. "Remember what I said?" She swallowed, forcing a nod. The words from the plane still lingered. "Pretend you're with me." The terminal teemed with travelers dragging rolling suitcases, voices rising in a dozen languages. Neon signs pointed toward connecting flights: Paris, Vienna, Madrid. But Amelia barely noticed. Her senses were tuned to something else. Every step, every shadow. That's when she saw them. 3 men stood near the arrivals board suits. 2 dark postures, too rigid to be ordinary businessmen. They weren't watching the flights. They were watching the crowd. One of them raised a phone, glancing between the screen and the river of passengers searching. Amelia's breath caught. Her stomach plunged. Richard, he must have already known. He must have sent them. Her feet rooted to the polished floor. "Oh, God," she whispered. He found me." Before panic could choke her, Franco slipped his arm fully around her shoulders. To anyone else, it looked like a casual protective gesture from a man to his companion. To her, it felt like armor. "Keep walking," he said, voice low, steady. "Don't look at them." Her body moved because his did. Each step matched his measured pace. Her pulse hammered so loudly she thought the men could hear it. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught one of them glance in their way, only to look back down at his phone, hesitating. "Why aren't they stopping us?" She hissed under her breath. Franco's lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Because you're not alone." They passed a glass storefront. Their reflection looked startlingly convincing. A powerful man guiding his lover, her hair damp from travel, his suit, cutting a perfect silhouette. For a heartbeat, even Amelia almost believed it. Behind them, the men shifted positions. One lifted his phone again, murmuring something in German. Another scanned the crowd, more urgently. Her throat tightened. They know they must know. But Franco's grip only tightened slightly, pulling her closer as they reached the next gate area. His head inclined toward her ear, his voice a whisper. "Breathe. They won't touch you." Something in his certainty, unshaken absolute, slowed her panic. She dared not question it. The final boarding call for Milan echoed through the terminal. Franco guided her forward, his arm never leaving her shoulders until the flight attendant scanned their tickets. Only when they stepped onto the jet bridge did he finally release her. Amelia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Who were they?" she asked in a rush. Franco's expression revealed nothing, people looking for the wrong thing. His answer left her unsettled. Richard's men, or someone else entirely. As the jet engines roared to life once more, Amelia sank into her seat trembling. Beside her, Franco adjusted his cufflinks, his face unreadable. Outside, Munich's lights blurred past the window, fading into the night. She thought she'd escaped Richard's cage, but now another shadow loomed, one she didn't yet understand. The plane descended over northern Italy, just as dawn spread pale gold across the horizon. From her window, Amelia caught her first glimpse of Milan. An endless maze of terracotta roofs, glass towers rising like sentinels, and the jagged white crown of the Duomo piercing the morning light. Her chest tightened. This wasn't Boston. This wasn't Richard. This was something entirely new. At Malpensa Airport, Franco guided her through customs with the same effortless authority he'd shown in Munich. No one questioned him. Officers nodded subtly, as if recognizing something in his presence. By the time they stepped into the cool morning air, a sleek black sedan waited at the curb. The driver, Alessio Bianchi, moved with sharp precision as he opened the door. His eyes, quick and assessing, landed briefly on Amelia before he inclined his head. Franco's introduction was simple. "Alessio, you can trust him." She slid into the leather interior, inhaling the faint scent of cologne and polished wood. The city unfolded beyond the tinted windows as the car pulled away. Graffiti-stained walls beside designer boutiques, ancient stone facades pressed against steel and glass skyscrapers. Milan was a city of contradictions, and Amelia felt caught in its rhythm, beauty shadowed by something darker. They stopped on a narrow cobblestone street lined with ochre buildings draped in ivy. Franco gestured toward a modest pension with flower boxes beneath its windows. "This is where you'll stay." The door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 60s stepped out. Silver hair swept back neatly, dark eyes alive with warmth and caution. Rosa Key, her Italian, spilled fast, her hands expressive as she greeted Franco. Then her gaze shifted to Amelia, softening. She clasped Amelia's hands, gently patting them as though she'd known her all her life. "She says you are welcome here," Franco translated, "and that you carry sad eyes but a strong spirit." Amelia's throat tightened. She whispered, "Tell her thank you." Inside, the pension smelled of garlic herbs and fresh bread. Wooden floors creaked beneath Amelia's steps. Religious paintings hung on whitewashed walls, their colors muted with age. Rosa led her upstairs to a small room with windows overlooking a courtyard where lemon trees grew in ceramic pots. It wasn't luxury, but it was safe. When Rosa left her to rest, Amelia leaned against the window frame listening. Outside, the city stirred awake, church bells ringing from the Duomo scooters, buzzing through alleys, vendors calling out in melodic Italian. The sounds washed over her, cleansing the echoes of Boston's rain. For 3 days, she lived as though wrapped in cotton. Rosa knocked softly each morning with a tray. Espresso so strong it burned sweet on her tongue. Cornettis still warm from the bakery down the street. In the afternoons, Amelia wandered the cobblestone lanes, sketchbook tucked under her arm. One afternoon, she found herself standing beneath the glass vaults of Galleria Vittorio, Emanuel Sagedin. The mosaic floor glistened under sunlight streaming through iron and glass arches. Tourists posed, luxury shops gleamed, yet Amelia saw lines and shadows others overlooked. She pulled her charcoal pencil from the worn leather case she had carried since college. Her hand trembled at first. Richard had called her sketches worthless, a waste of time. But as the pencil moved across paper tracing the curve of the dome above, she remembered who she had been before him. The sound of graphite against the page steadied her pulse. Bellissimo, a voice murmured behind her. Amelia turned quickly. Not Franco, just a passerby, smiling at her drawing before moving on. Still, her heart raced because part of her expected it to be him, and sometimes it was good. Twice, she caught sight of Franco in the distance. Once leaning against his black car across the piazza, another time seated at a cafe terrace espresso untouched as his eyes followed the crowd. He never approached, never intruded, yet Amelia felt his presence like a tether invisible, but unyielding. At night, she lay awake beneath Rose's embroidered quilts, listening to the distant hum of the city. Her thoughts tangled between two truths. Richard had lost his grip on her life, but another man's shadow stretched silently around her. Franco de Mo Protector, stranger danger. She pressed her palm against the sketchbook by her bedside. For the first time in years, her pages were filling again. Arches, domes, doorways that whispered stories of freedom. She told herself that as long as she kept drawing, the choices were still hers. But deep down, Amelia knew Milan was not just her sanctuary. It was Franco's kingdom, and sooner or later his world would demand she decide what place she held in it. The invitation came without warning. It was a Tuesday night when Alessio pulled up outside Rosa's pension in a different car. Sleek black windows tinted so dark they swallowed the streetlights. He didn't say much, only opened the rear door and murmured, "Signora Dico requests your company." Amelia hesitated, sketchbook still in her lap, charcoal smudging her fingers. She glanced at Rosa, who stood by the doorway, eyes soft but weary. The older woman gave a single nod as if to say, "Go, but be careful." Amelia smoothed the simple black dress she'd bought at a boutique near the Duomo. It wasn't expensive, but it was the first piece of clothing she'd chosen for herself in years. Her heart pounded as she slid into the car's leather interior. The drive cut through Milan's nighttime pulse. Neon signs bled against rain-lick asphalt. Scooters zipped between cars, horns blaring. The city glowed alive and restless. Amelia's reflection in the tinted glass looked pale, uncertain. The car descended into an underground garage beneath a fortress of steel and glass. Alessio led her to a private elevator. When the doors opened, Franco stood waiting. He wore a black suit, perfectly tailored, no-tie, collar open just enough to reveal a glint of gold at his throat. His presence filled the space before he even spoke. "You look beautiful," he said simply. No smile, just truth stated like fact. Her pulse stuttered. "Where are we going? Upstairs to meet my family." The elevator carried them silently upward. Amelia felt each floor pass like the tick of a clock counting down to something irreversible. When the doors opened, a hallway stretched before them, oil paintings lining the walls, carpets muffling each step. The scent of aged whiskey and polished wood lingered in the air. At the end, double doors swung open into a room that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Milan glittering below lights scattered like stars across the city. The space was furnished in dark leather and carved mahogany, every detail exuding old-world wealth. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by men in tailored suits. Their conversation stilled as Franco entered with Amelia at his side. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some sharp with curiosity, others cool with calculation. "Gentlemen," Franco said, his hand resting lightly on her back. "This is Amelia Taylor." The introductions were brief names delivered like chess pieces set on a board. Victoria Greco, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, his handshake cold as marble. Salvatore Esposito, broad, scarred knuckles betraying his history, his gaze appraising. Enzo Duca, younger, smoother smile, hiding something harder. Each man greeted her with old-world courtesy, but their scrutiny was heavy weighing and measuring. "Please," Franco gestured, guiding her into the chair beside his at the head of the table. What followed was unlike anything Amelia had ever witnessed. At first, it sounded like business, discussions of shipments, contracts, negotiations. But beneath the polite words ran a darker current. Territories meant control of districts. Arrangements meant debts owed in blood. Loyalty meant survival. Amelia listened, her stomach tightening as realization set in. These men weren't businessmen. They were power itself, cloaked in silk and tailored suits. And at the center of it sat Franco. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, the others leaned in. When he made a decision, no one challenged it. The room's gravity shifted around him. Younger than most, yet authority radiated from him like heat from a fire. "The situation in Boston is resolved," Victoria reported at one point, his voice careful. Amelia stiffened at the name of her city. Her city. Richard's city. "Good," Franco replied, his tone clipped. "And the embassy discouraged," Enzo said smoothly. "The lawyer has decided to pursue other cases." A chill crawled down Amelia's spine. She didn't need details to understand. Strings had been pulled, doors quietly shut, paths blocked. Richard's attempts to drag her back had been erased before they began. This was what protection looked like in Franco's world. Problems didn't just vanish, they were made to vanish. When the meeting ended, the men approached Franco one by one, offering quiet words, respectful nods. Some glanced at her again, their expressions veiled. She caught fragments. Complications careful. The old man won't approve. Finally, the room emptied, leaving only to her and Franco. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the city lights. For a long moment, he stood at the window back to her Milan sprawling like a kingdom below. "This is what I am," he said without turning. The words landed heavy. Not a confession, a declaration. Amelia rose, her voice steady, though her pulse thundered. "And these men, they work for you. They work with me," Franco corrected. "But yes, my family has influence here in many cities." Her throat tightened. "Your family? You mean the Mafia?" The word hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Franco turned at last, his dark eyes meeting hers. "We prefer other terms, but yes." "So when you helped me," she whispered, "when you made things disappear, you weren't just kind." Oh, his gaze softened just barely. "I told you before, in my world, fear keeps people alive. You should understand." He paused, stepping closer, the scent of his cologne wrapping around her. "I am often the thing they fear." The admission should have terrified her. Instead, Amelia found herself searching his face, seeing not only power, but the shadow of pain beneath it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you asked for the truth." His voice dropped lower roar. "And because if you choose to stay under my protection, Amelia, you must understand you're not just accepting me. You're entering my world." Her breath caught. "And if I don't, then you face your husband's reach alone. And whatever else comes for you," silence stretched thick and unrelenting. The city outside glittered like 1,000 watching eyes. Amelia's pulse pounded as she looked at him. This man who had held her hand through turbulence, who had made powerful men tremble, who now stood offering not just safety, but a cage lined with silk and gold. She didn't answer, not yet. But her silence was enough. Franco's eyes told her he already knew. Her decision would shape both their lives. The pension's small lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh bread from Rose's kitchen. Amelia had just returned from the market, a paper bag of fruit and warm bread tucked under her arm. When the air shifted, he was there, Richard Taylor. His broad frame looked out of place against the delicate Italian decor. Dark suit, pressed sharp tie, perfectly knotted hair combed with that meticulous vanity she once mistook for confidence. His smile was the same one he used on clients back in Boston, practiced charming. But behind his eyes burned the familiar fire she knew too well. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, voice smooth as silk over steel. "Did you really think you could run from me?" The bag slipped from Amelia's arms, apples rolling across the tile. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. Her throat closed, her knees weakened. Richard had crossed an ocean to drag her back. Behind the counter, Rosa froze. Confusion etched into her lined face. She murmured something in Italian, asking if everything was all right. Amelia forced the word out. "Richard, how?" He took a step closer, his cologne sharp undercut with whiskey. "I told you I have connections. The Italian police were very sympathetic. Once I explained my poor, unstable wife had fled in the middle of the night. They're prepared to commit you, Amelia, for your own safety." Her blood ran cold. He pulled a folder from his leather briefcase and opened it with theatrical precision. Inside were documents, psych evaluations, affidavit signatures that looked official. "This is insanity," she whispered. "No, darling." He smirked. "This is control. Something you seem to have forgotten belongs to me." He reached for her arm, his fingers clamping the same spot where bruises had barely faded. Pain flared as she struggled, crying out. Rosa rushed from behind the desk, protesting in Italian, but Richard shoved her aside roughly. The older woman stumbled, striking the desk with a cry. "Stop!" Amelia shouted, but her voice cracked. The pass clawed at her, dragging her back to Boston kitchens, slammed doors, nights of silence and fists. Then another voice cut through the chaos. "Take your hands off her." The air shifted. Franco stood in the doorway, Alessio just behind him. Franco wasn't in his tailored suit tonight, just dark jeans, a black sweater that outlined the dangerous strength beneath. Yet he seemed to fill the room with presence alone. Richard froze his grip, tightening on Amelia as recognition flickered. "You," he spat. "You were on the plane." "I was," Franco replied evenly. He stepped forward, each movement quiet, deliberate. "And I warned you once." Richard's laugh was sharp brittle. "You think you can intimidate me? I have legal authority. The police are on my side." He brandished the folder like a shield. Franco didn't even glance at it. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket, spoke a few clipped sentences in Italian, and held it out. "Detective Ritchie would like a word." Richard hesitated, then snatched the phone. Finally, someone reasonable. His face pad as the voice on the other end spoke. Confusion twisted into panic. "What do you mean, fraudulent? I had assurances." "No, the paperwork is legitimate." Franco plucked the phone back, ending the call. "Your lawyer has withdrawn. The embassy has been informed your documents are falsified and your reputation." His voice dropped lower. "Lethal is finished." Richard's mask slipped, revealing desperation. "You can't do this." "I already have." For a moment, Richard looked small. The man who once loomed over Amelia now seemed like a shadow unraveling. But then his eyes flared wild. He yanked his hand from his briefcase metal, flashing. A gun! Amelia's scream caught in her throat. Rosa gasped from the corner, clutching her chest. But Franco moved before the trigger could tighten. One fluid step, a sharp twist. Metal clattered to the floor. Richard's cry of pain slicing the air, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, his wrist broken clean under Franco's grip. "You broke my wrist!" Richard howled, collapsing to his knees. Franco looked down at him, voice cold, almost conversational. "Be grateful it wasn't your neck." He gestured, and Alizio stepped forward with silent efficiency. The gun was kicked away, the papers shoved back into Richard's chest. "Escort Mr. Taylor to the airport," Franco instructed. "Make sure he understands Italy is no longer safe for him." Richard struggled, face twisted with hatred, as Alicio's men hauled him up. "This isn't over," he snarled at Amelia. "You think you've won, but I'll find another way." Franco's eyes locked on his. "No," he said with absolute certainty. "You won't." The lobby went silent as Richard was dragged out into the night, his curses echoing uselessly. Only the sound of Roz's uneven breathing and Amelia's thundering pulse remained. Franco bent to help Rosa into a chair, murmuring gentle Italian, until her color returned. Then he turned to Amelia. His gaze softened, but his words struck true. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at her arm where Richard's grip had left fresh bruises over old ones. I'm okay." "No." His voice gentled, almost tender. "But you will be." Amelia stared at the spot where Richard had knelt moments ago. For 2 years, he had been the monster in her nightmares, the inescapable force that controlled her life. And now, in less than 5 minutes, Franco de Meaux had shattered him. The past was gone. The future loomed. And Amelia knew she had just stepped fully into Franco's world. Venice shimmered beneath the first blush of dawn, canals turning silver as gondolas drifted in lazy arcs. The Rialto Bridge rose above it all, its pale stone arches, catching the light like something eternal. Tourists would come later, cameras flashing, voices echoing. But now, in the quiet of early morning, the bridge belonged to her. Amelia leaned against the cold railing, her coat drawn tight, the damp air thick with the scent of salt and old water. Beneath her, the canal lapped gently, carrying whispers of centuries past. She had been here nearly an hour, watching the sun push itself over tiled rooftops. She heard him before she saw him, the cadence of footsteps on stone measured certain. Franco de Meaux. "I thought I'd find you here." His voice rumbled low, intimate, against the hum of the waking city. Amelia didn't turn. "How did you know? You said once you wanted to see everything Italy had to offer. The Rialto appears in every guidebook." He stepped closer, though, careful to keep a respectful distance. "And Alessio saw which direction you walked." She almost smiled. "Still watching me, still protecting you," Franco corrected. They stood in silence, the city around them, stretching awake vendors, arranging stalls, bells chiming from distant towers, the faint aroma of baking bread drifting from hidden ovens. Amelia let it wash over her, then exhaled sharply, the decision pressing against her chest like a blade. "Richard's gone," she said softly. "For the first time in years, I can breathe without waiting for the door to slam." "Yes," Franco agreed, but his tone carried weight. "Gone, because I removed him. His threats, his reach, they end, where I say they end." She turned then, meeting his eyes, dark, steady, filled with the kind of power that made men tremble. "That's what terrifies me," she whispered. He frowned, stepping closer. "Terrifies you? You saved me, Franco. You made him vanish like he was nothing. But if you can erase Richard so easily, what else can you erase?" "My choices, my mistakes, my freedom." Her voice broke, but steadied again. "Will I love you because I choose to, or because you've removed every other path until you're the only option left?" Franco's jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw something raw, pain, not power, in his eyes. "You think I would manipulate you? I think you would protect me from everything, even from myself. And maybe that's not the same as being free." She pulled an envelope from her pocket, thick ivory paper bearing the pension's letterhead. She held it out to him. "What is this?" His voice was quiet, almost weary. "A letter," she said. "Don't read it now. Read it tonight alone." He took it, his fingers brushing hers, lingering longer than they should. "Amelia," she swallowed. "It says, 'Thank you for saving me, for reminding me that I'm worth saving.' But it also says goodbye." Franco went utterly still. Only his eyes moved, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. "Goodbye. I'm leaving Venice today. I don't know where yet. Maybe Florence. Maybe farther. But I need to find out who I am. When no one is protecting me, when no one is controlling me, I need to learn how to save myself." For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched heavy between them, punctuated only by the water slapping stone. Finally, his voice broke low and steady. "And after, when you found yourself," she smiled sadly, tears blurring the edges of his face, "maybe I'll come back, maybe I'll write, or maybe I'll just carry the memory of the man who taught me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty." Franco's hand twitched, as if he wanted to reach for her, to pull her into the cage of his arms and never let her go. But he didn't. For the first time in his life, he let someone walk away. Amelia rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, breathing in the familiar scent of him one last time. "Be careful, Franco Dico. The world needs men like you, even if women like me can't live in your shadow." And then she turned, footsteps echoing against the stone arch, her figure dissolving into the crowd, now spilling onto the bridge. Franco remained rooted, the envelope heavy in his hand, the ache heavier in his chest. He didn't follow. He couldn't, because sometimes love meant holding on, and sometimes the harder choice, it meant letting go. Winter settled over Milan with a quiet ferocity. The city moved as it always did. Fashion shows glittering under chandeliers, deals struck in glass towers, shadows slipping through alleys after midnight. And at the center of it all, Franco Demo. In his office high above the city, he sat alone, a crystal glass of scotch untouched on the desk. Paperwork lay in neat stacks, contracts that could shift markets, instructions that could end empires. Yet his gaze wasn't on them. It lingered instead on the ivory envelope he kept locked in the drawer, the one Amelia had pressed into his hand on the Rialto Bridge. He had read it 12 times, 100 maybe. "Thank you. Goodbye." Words that cut deeper than any blade. Words that left behind an ache he couldn't drown in power, or silence, or wine. Tonight, the silence broke with a knock. Alessio entered, expression unreadable, a small envelope in his hand. "For use." "Senor, no return address, postmarked Venice." Franco's chest tightened as he took it. The paper was rough foreign in its simplicity. He turned it over slowly, almost afraid to open it. Inside was a postcard, a reproduction of Teatro alla Scala, its gilded arches frozen in printed light. On the back, familiar handwriting curved across the space. "I'm learning to paint again, learning to fly. Thank you for teaching me the difference." No signature. None was needed. Franco closed his eyes, the weight of the card almost unbearable in his hand. He could picture her standing in a sunlit piazza, sketchbook in her arms, hair loose in the Venetian breeze. Free, finally free. He set the postcard gently in the drawer beside the letter. 2 artifacts, 2 wounds, 2 promises. Then he closed it, locking both away, though the ache remained. Outside his window, Milan glowed under winter's cloak headlights streaking across wet streets, the Duomo lit like a crown in the distance. He raised the scotch at last, the amber liquid catching the city's reflection. For the first time in his life, Franco de Mo had let someone go, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like love. He drank slow and deliberate, the silence around him no longer empty but full of her absence. Somewhere beyond the canals of Venice, Amelia Taylor was choosing her own path. And somewhere in Milan, a mafia boss waited, not with chains, not with demands, but with memory. Because sometimes the strongest vow wasn't to hold on. It was to let go and to keep the space ready should fate ever bring her back.